Thank you, Thomas. He's already gone. I think he mowed a lot of grass before my feet, actually, and but there's still a lot I can actually talk about. I'm happy to be here again. I think this is the third or the fourth time I am doing this. Always very tiny but very highly experienced, with highly experienced people conference. The perspective of the European, on the future of the European cannabis industry, medicinal cannabis industry, that's a very broad term, and actually where I am coming from as being the founder and the chairman of Bedrocan, back in basically started operating as it did in 2003, a company that was hired by the Dutch government at that time, and still is by the Dutch government, for production of cannabis flowers, dried cannabis flowers, into a program of the Dutch Health Ministry. Basically looks a little bit like what Denmark has been doing, kind of a pilot program. But in our case, it was, from a company perspective, it was more. We were, as a company, founded in 1984. I will just tell you a little bit about where we are coming from. So many of you will know, a lot of you don't know. Established in 1984 as a horticultural company, doing actually vegetables and doing it indoor. With one big leap going to 2017, because that is where we actually did what we always have tried to bring across in the world until the time. Make a statement of the quality we try to provide to the world with regard to cannabis, and we got we were the first company to acquire a GMP certificate. Actually, in the beginning, also for cultivation of cannabis. That was a little bit weird. I will talk a bit more about that later. But it actually adheres to processing cannabis. Nowadays, the processing of cannabis starts actually at the drying phase. There's a lot of discussion, always has been on that part. We are running 2 indoor production facilities in the Netherlands now, with a total capacity of almost 7.5 metric tons. That production capacity is there, and we are in startup phase with a new facility in Denmark that has a initial capacity of 2,000 kilos. And Thomas was actually referring to that already. You can think big, and you can think a little bit megalomane about production capacity. What we actually try to do is build upon demand. And from a pharmaceutical perspective and a medical perspective, I think that is also a needed thing. The demand is actually steering your production and your supply. And demand is actually, in this world, established by doctors, not by patients. Patients go to a doctor, and a doctor is actually prescribing. It was one of the first things I learned in the pharmaceutical world 21 years ago when I had my first discussion with with the Dutch the Dutch packager, actually, a pharmaceutical company, that said, mind you guys, the doctor is your off-taker, nobody else. It's the doctor who is actually providing you access, or providing access to for your product to the market. The second very important thing happening to us these days is that we opened up our clinical research unit now in Utrecht in the Netherlands. We are trying to do some things from scratch with our raw material. This little research unit is actually doing clinical trials, and they are actually looking into the basics of let's say phase 1 and phase 2A studies. So the safety and efficacy, those are the first studies done on our own products. So done on herbal flower. What everybody is saying, this is not possible. We think it is not only possible, it's especially doable when you have a properly standardized product. Last thing I want to mention here is the route of FDA approval that our product is going now through cooperation with a small Israeli company called Psyche Medical. Psyche Medical actually brought financing for a true FDA approval route, and that route is basically covered by a pharmaceutical company from the UK, and that company again is sponsored by, not sponsored, has been sponsored by Philip Morris in the past, so big tobacco company going in there as well. However, those companies separated again, but the financing is still going through that track. Anyway, the FDA approval route has been set in with a herbal product for inhalation purposes. So we do expect results. And again, it's based upon standardization in general. It's standardization of device, but also standardization of the products going into it. What does standardization actually mean for us? Standardization of a plant, people are always saying, nah, that is not really possible. I know. And to some extent, those people are right, and to some extent, they are not right. If you want to standardize your product, meaning the dried flower, then you need a standardization tool that we call genetic standardization. For the dried flower, and also for a new product that we are introducing probably next year, trichome powder. Some people like to call it hashish, but this is slightly different. But it's the actual compound from the cannabis plant that contains the active compounds. So standardization of dried flower, you need your standardization of your genetics. That's where it all starts with. I will come to that a little bit later. You need to standardize your process. If you don't standardize your process, your flower can go in all kinds of directions with regard to its chemical content. So the chemical content of the flower is actually defining your product. And for that you need that standardization. So your cultivation and processing needs to be standardized as well. Those are two major components in your operation when you're talking about what we call the GACP part, and in our company it's the GMCCP part. So the herbal part of the plant part, you need full standardization on every aspect of your grow. Standardization of supply actually means that you have the ability to continuously produce, so cultivate on an ongoing basis, if necessary, day by day, have output on a day-to-day basis, but have an ongoing stream that you can steer on the longer term, but the ongoing stream is there always. It's the basic of the company, and you have, in our case, we have batches of different sizes. So depending on the facility size, we produce batches from either 15 to 20 kilos or from 80 to 100 kilos. That batch size, those batches can, that output can be, depending on your facility, you can have twice a week or 3 times a week, you can have batch output, and that is on an ongoing basis. So the organizational part of your company becomes very important to that. The genetic standardization, it's something I like to emphasize a little bit more, because I think it is of the utmost importance, where your chemical composition of the plant is not only THC or CBD or CBN or whatever. If you want to sell THC or CBD, that's fine. You extract your plant material, you purify your compounds, and then you have your THC and CBD. If you are, and you see it more and more nowadays, if you want to sell the entire composition, chemical composition of your plant, you need a standard chemical composition that can only be achieved by genetic standardization. So if your genetic profile of the plant is identical, cloning is the basis for that, and you're able to do that for an indefinite time. Currently, our varieties go back for more than 25 years, some of them. Most of them are about 20 years. So the single seed idea behind that actually means one single seed. If we have what we call a variety, is one single seed. We don't have in our production facilities, you will not find any cannabis seed. If we do something with seeds, it happens in our on a development side, on a research and development side, where we try to create other chemical varieties with other different components that are interesting, or which are interesting for the pharmaceutical work. One of the compounds that always has been asked for over the past years already is THCV, for instance. Ozempic is now well known, but THCV could do similar things with people. The pharmaceutical approach for a cultivation company, that is sometimes a very difficult thing. It starts, of course, with hygiene. Pharmaceutical hygiene standards is applied throughout our company. That starts with cultivation as well. It's not that we grow in clean rooms, because that is one bridge too far. The clean room, applies to processing. It does, but it cannot apply to cultivation, as your plants contain living organisms that go into that clean room, and then you're kind of outside the reality of a class 5 clean room that you would like to use for it. Anyway, strict cleaning procedures, and of course the ongoing quality checks by a QA department. We have a specific QA department that is dedicated not only to the processing side, but also to the cultivation side. And I want to talk a little bit about that more, because normally GACP applies to the cultivation side. GACP is being seen by some people as very strict. To us, it cannot be strict enough to that regard. What we actually did is translate GACP, translate it into actually GMP. And that's where we came up with the name GMCCP, meaning good manufacturing, good medical cannabis cultivation procedures. Basically the only difference with processing is that under GMCCP we don't work in clean rooms. Actually, that's the only thing that is different. The organization and the structure of the organization is fully GMP based. It means that every step of the process is being monitored and is subject to all those. It's subject to testing, but it's also subject to what is normal in GMP, the whole system of CAPAs and sorry. Good. Yeah. Those, but I was thinking about another term. It's not here, so doesn't matter. GMP. GMP. Sorry. You were saying? Yeah. It's the kappa and the corrective action and preventive actions. Those are the ones. Yeah. Anyway, but also the deviations. That's the one. Drying, processing, and packaging belong under GMP. Drying, however, is something that is also very difficult to process, to do in a clean room. Actually, because you bring in live plant matter with live microbiology. Although the microbiology coming from the outside is very low, but the plant actually itself contains levels of microbiology that are unacceptable on the GMP level. So drying has its own GMP rules, so to speak. Processing is really into clean rooms and packaging as well, of course. One of the big questions in the world is what makes medical or medicinal cannabis different from recreational cannabis? Is there a difference anyway? People from the recreational world were quite often telling me that cannabis for recreational purposes should also be standardized. Cannabis for recreational purposes needs also quality. However, there are big differences, of course. When you have cannabis as a medicine, it needs to be prescribed by a doctor. That is one thing. You cannot live in a world where, at one hand, we say we have systems in place to prescribe medicines to patients, and then say, this product doesn't need that. This product is, you can grow it yourself, and there's no control, not even qualitative control over it, let alone regulatory control. Cannabis as a medicine truly needs oversight. Why am I saying that? Because currently what we see is that cannabis as a medicine is only accessible to about 10% of patients in countries where cannabis is even allowed as a medicine. Why? Because 90% of the doctors doesn't want to prescribe it. I am trying to convince people that if you want cannabis as a medicine, everybody else has the same right as you have. So I see it as a task for companies, but also for regulatory bodies, to get to that point where access improves, where doctors are believing, or not only believing, but are gaining trust in companies that allow them with their mind, from their mind, to start prescribing. It's not only about the quality of the company itself, it's of course also about proof of efficacy. But that cannabis needs to undergo those aspects of medicine before you can truly use it as a medicine. And all the patients that are eligible to use cannabis have real access. Here in Germany, we see a level of legalization for adult use, as they call it, or recreational purposes. The effect on patients is already there. We know it, and the effect is basically a psychological one with doctors, but also with regulators. You see differences between doctors or regulators over Germany. In the different states of Germany, there are different thoughts on the use of cannabis for that part. But also on the regulation itself, where, for instance, it is not allowed to use cannabis near schools or actually in schools, and depriving groups of patients from actual normal use of cannabis by inhalation. So those effects are there, and those should be taken care of. So patients' needs as a priority in that regard is something that really needs to come to the surface. And again, for that we need more than only a doctor that wants to prescribe. We will need a side of doctors willing to prescribe. We will also need regulatory development. That is happening in Europe right now. Netherlands was actually the first country in Europe that legalized cannabis for medicinal use. But it basically got a little bit into it stumbled into its own success, where we see that a governmental system is applied to what is now more seen as a commercial product. a government moving into a commercial effort is difficult, and we hope that we know that the Netherlands and the Dutch government is already trying to deal with that, and we hope on an outcome that will actually bring us back to a better stage, and hopefully a stage where we become comparable with Denmark. I have to watch my time. There is a changing situation in countries like Germany, UK, Greece, Austria, Italy, Switzerland, where actual cultivation is allowed and patients are allowed to use. So that's not Denmark and that's not Portugal, for instance. Scandinavia, France and Spain and Poland don't have cultivation programs and Poland is now providing to patients, but Scandinavia and France and Spain are still growing up to that phase. And if you have Malta, Portugal, North Macedonia, and actually to some extent Denmark as well, they allow cultivation, but not for their own patients. So we have a scattered field in Europe where we need alignment at some point, where I would like to see the European government come in and the European Committee to start working on that alignment. Actually, things are happening, and I'm very happy that it started actually at the UN level. So the United Nations, where everything begins due to the Single Convention of 1961. Everything at the UN level prohibited cannabis up until 2020. And from January 2021, the UN Single Convention was changed in a very minimal way, but just effective enough to allow cannabis to enter the world of medicines. Cannabis has been rescheduled from Schedule 4, meaning no medical value, to Schedule 1, which is basically the highest protected or the highest protective schedule for dangerous substances, more or less. They scheduled cannabis there, but it allows at least for medical use and research. So that is the starting point where we see things changing not only in Europe, but also worldwide. The EMA, Thomas referred to it already, the request for scientific input, so product input, what is going on there on cannabis flower, and of course also the new monograph for cannabis flower that has been issued by the EU, and that will come into force by July 1st this year. There are a lot of things in that monograph. One of the most eye-dashing ones is the one that says the standard deviation should shrink from 20 plus or minus to 10 plus or minus. I think that is achievable when you also dive into your product development in a better way. And Denmark doing it now by 5% is even more challenging, I think. So challenges, product development, I already mentioned it. One of the things we are going to do is we will leave the whole flower behind us. And that's for a reason. We found out that the whole flower divided across the plant has different levels of active compounds. You cannot help it. It's part of what the plant is. You see those differences, and it actually helps when you're able to homogenize your product. However, homogenizing whole flowers doesn't work either. So you have to bring the product to a level where you can homogenize, but it's still recognizable as cannabis, and that is what we call granulating. We already did it for years with our smaller products, but we are about to start doing this with our main product variety, Bedrocan, the 22% THC variety, to do that as well. There are still few approved cannabis-based medicines. Actually, the GW and now Jazz Pharma products, Epidiolex and Sativex are the main ones that are truly registered as a medicine. But we need more, and we hope to contribute to that, both through our clinical research unit on one hand, but also through our product development. I mentioned trichome powder as another product. Trichome powder is a very specific herbal product, but actually only contains the active and no herbal leaf matter or the let's say the green stuff that will not be in there in that trichome powder. It's a very interesting product also for making full spectrum oils and other products. And of course, the pharmaceutical registration of a flower-based product, Psyche Medical, I already mentioned it in the beginning of my presentation, is a very interesting development. True perspective on the future now, the standard regulations with an EMA monograph, they will come now. The EU has taken this initiative, so the EU is on it. And countries, but especially producers, will be obliged down the road to comply with those regulations. And it will certainly mean something for a lot of companies. What we also need is a well-defined separation between adult use and medical use. If that is not going to happen, then a lot of patients that are now having no access will keep on having no access. We need that true separation. Legalization of medicinal use at the EU level, that's the next step, not on the country level as it is happening now. It's fine, it's great that it happened, but we need to make a next step now. And of course, we need new pharmaceutical forms through research and development programs. And that can be done with the help of governments. I also make a stance here for companies doing it themselves or in a cooperative way, cooperate with each other to achieve these things and be highly specialized in what you do and cooperate from your specialism with each other. It's something that is happening. And I think that is it. I can start telling a lot more, but maybe in the round table we will do more. I think I'm on time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much.